Imagine standing near a dark, mysterious lake at night. The air is freezing, heavy with this thick, crawling fog. The only thing you can hear is the subtle wind moving through the cinematic shadows of these ancient pines, almost like a low-frequency rumble you can feel right in your chest. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a case that completely defies logic. It's a mystery that literally leaves this cold dread right in the pit of your stomach. We're breaking down the chilling account of the Echoing Woods, a story where the physical evidence and survivor testimony point to something entirely unnatural.
3 experienced hunters entered the forest, and only one came back. It's a terrifyingly simple equation, right? But when rescue teams finally reached this lone survivor and asked him what happened to his friends, well, he didn't give them a simple answer. He looked at the authorities and just said 4 impossible words. There were 2 of them. I want you to let that hang in the air for a second. There were 2 of them. This creates a massive contradiction, because the authorities knew without a shadow of a doubt that only 3 hunters entered those woods, not 4. So who, or what, was the second entity he was talking about? To understand this, we really need to look at the timeline. Section 1, 3 into the woods, a fully equipped expedition. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand exactly who we're talking about here. These weren't amateurs. These were guys who knew this specific forest better than anyone else.
They were packed. They carried rifles, they had radios, they hauled in extensive emergency supplies. Honestly, getting lost in these woods was basically impossible for this group. They were perfectly prepared. And yet, shortly after sunset, all contact just stopped. No radio messages, no distress calls, absolutely nothing but the wind.
The next morning, search teams ventured into the fog and found their camp. And this is where the physical evidence starts getting highly disturbing. The fire was literally still burning. Their food was safely hanging from the trees. And the most alarming part, their weapons were completely untouched. So the takeaway here is that there was no ambush, no chaotic struggle. It looked exactly as if these 3 highly trained men just stood up, left all their survival gear behind, and willingly walked right into the absolute darkness.
Section 2, the 4th footprint, the impossible math. Because what the rescuers found leading away from that pristine campsite turned what should have been a standard missing persons case into something deeply supernatural.
Rescuers found footprints in the snow, 3 sets of tracks leading away from the camp, which is exactly what you'd expect. But after tracing these tracks for several hundred feet into the dense, dark woods, the math just broke. Suddenly, there were 4 sets of footprints.
The physical reality of that night is just horrifying. Think about it. There were no tracks entering the area, no tracks approaching from the side. This 4th set of footprints just appeared out of thin air. It simply materialized, matching their stride, suddenly walking right beside the 3 men.
The missing men were never seen again, but days later, one single hunter stumbled out of the tree line. He was barely alive, frozen, utterly terrified. Reports say his face looked years older, like it had been aged by some profound trauma, and he actively refused to even look back toward the trees. For hours, he just sat there in absolute silence. It wasn't until investigators showed him photographs of those 4 sets of footprints in the snow that he began violently shaking. He looked at the photos, totally consumed by exhaustion, and whispered, "It followed us all night."
Section 3, Voices in the Dark. The psychological hunt begins. Based on the survivors' harrowing testimony, we can actually construct a timeline of what happened after they left their burning fire. According to his story, the nightmare kicked off just after midnight. They heard a voice calling from deep within the dark, foggy woods. It sounded like a woman, screaming desperately for help. The men, acting purely on instinct, grabbed their flashlights and followed the sound. The screams got louder, closer, more frantic, and then, instantly, they stopped. The forest dropped into this absolute unnatural silence. No wind, no animals. Just a heavy, dead quiet. And that is when one of the hunters pointed his flashlight toward the distant trees. Something was standing there, watching them.
They tried to leave, but the survivor noted that the forest had somehow changed. Every trail looked different. Landmarks were completely gone. The map no longer matched reality. And then the voices returned out of the darkness. But you see, they were no longer a stranger's screams. One hunter heard his wife pleading with him. Another heard the voice of his young son. The 3rd hunter heard his own dead father. Each voice was perfectly mimicked, begging them from the shadows to follow. Imagine standing in the freezing dark and you hear your own family begging for help.
For hours,
These voices relentlessly pursued them. They stayed just ahead, close enough to hear, but always far enough away to never actually reach. And then the first hunter vanished. He was walking right beside the others. 1 second he's there, gone the next. No scream, no struggle. He was simply swallowed by the dark.
Section 4. The Survivor's Warning. What was waiting in the trees? After their friend vanished without a sound, the remaining 2 men searched frantically. And as they panned their flashlights around their position, the terrifying realization hit them. They had been completely surrounded.
They found dozens of fresh footprints circling them in the snow, and they weren't human. When they finally spotted a figure in the distance, their desperate human minds tried to rationalize it. They thought, okay, it's just a lost hiker, tall, thin, standing perfectly motionless. But then the flashlight beam hit its face, and the truth was far worse. The eyes reflected the light like an animal's, but they were bright, unnatural, glowing eyes. And then the figure vanished instantly. It didn't run, it didn't walk, it just ceased to be there.
The psychological torment continued through the freezing night. And then, just before dawn, the second hunter disappeared. But unlike the first time, this time there was a sound. A single echoing scream that cut through the fog. And then, dead silence. The survivor was now entirely alone in the freezing blackness. Terrified, he climbed up onto a rocky ridge, praying for daylight. As he looked down into the swirling snowstorm, he finally saw it clearly, like a giant shadow moving below. The creature was impossibly tall. Its body looked severely starved, stretched incredibly tight over bone. Its arms hung far too low to be human, and those bright glowing eyes pierced upward at him through the blizzard. Worse still, as he stared down at this nightmare, he realized it wasn't alone. Several more figures stood silently in the periphery, just watching him.
Section 5. How the Wendigo Hunts. The Local Legend Explained. You know, the survivor later told investigators something that literally chilled them to the bone. As he sat on that ridge, shivering and waiting to die, he realized the creatures standing below weren't trying to physically attack him. They were just waiting, watching him, almost as if they were deciding whether he'd become one of them.
The 2 missing hunters were never found. No bodies, no equipment, no evidence. Just tracks disappearing into the unknown. But according to local folklore, this is the exact terrifying methodology of the Wendigo. It doesn't hunt with speed. It doesn't overpower you with physical strength. Its true weapon is psychological manipulation. It uses human empathy against you. It lures you into the freezing dark with a voice you trust, a voice that knows your name, a voice that sounds perfectly human, until it is far too late.
When the rescue teams finally pulled that lone survivor out of the freezing fog, he was completely broken. He didn't ask for food. He didn't ask to go home. He just stared blankly, repeating the exact same sentence over and over again. Don't follow the voices. Don't follow the voices. It leaves us with a truly unsettling question to ponder the next time you find yourself alone in the quiet dark. If you heard the person you loved most crying out from the shadows, are you entirely sure you wouldn't walk into the woods to find them?